Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, just doing some quick coverage on the PAX East panel that was done for Final Fantasy XIV. It was nothing major. We knew going in it was largely going to be a Q&A session where they fielded some questions on the forums, specifically about the 10th anniversary of Final Fantasy XIV. And so most of the questions, they end up being fluff pieces, a little bit of insight into some things Yoshida is thinking and planning, some lore-related questions. So just figured we'd make a quick video covering what those are, just so everyone's caught up on the news. But don't worry, there is an actual live letter next Friday, and we will be covering that, and that is going to be our first dive into patch 6.4. So here we have the unending journey. So I've actually time-stamped basically all of the questions so we can have them on screen, and then I've written, it's been a long day. I wrote down paraphrases of what his answers were. So the first question we had were, which expansion or story arc did the developers like most over these 10 years? Now, when this question's answered, it's just what Yoshida's favorite, not all the developers. He felt kind of bad because he was like, I have to pick my favorite child, basically, when it comes to this one right here. But he said, honestly, something that I don't think surprised very many people. Heavensward. Heavensward ended up being the clear answer. It was the first expansion they made after they had so frantically been working on A Realm Reborn. They didn't really know the future of the game at the time, but after they were done with Heavensward, I mean, they got to kind of integrate all those lore elements into the following expansions, take the experience from Heavensward into Stormblood, Shadowbringers, now Endwalker, and we have seen those long-standing events kind of, come to fruition, come back and play roles again in the story over and over. A big thing he mentions is remembering some feedback he got regarding the event after the final steps of faith, where they throw Nidhogg's eyes into the chasm, and he kind of just remembers laughing like, why would you do that? Why would you do that? He acknowledged it was probably not the smartest thing they could have done at the time, but they got to write things after that. So at the end of the day, it was what it was, and he was glad that he got to use it to continue things onward into the next titles. So it took him a little bit to get through that question. So our next one was, Yoshi P, as you played through Final Fantasy XIV or read scripts that his writers were bringing him, what part of the story moved you to tears and why? And he named 3 major moments from across Final Fantasy XIV. The first one he mentions is at the end of Shadowbringers, after you are returning to the Crystarium. There's a part where the camera is panning around the pillars as the Warrior of Light/Darkness is walking back into the Crystarium. And when one of the pillars crosses over the screen, it changes to be Ardbert and all of his allies. He says that's definitely one that he had a very special connection with. He loved it. The next one would have been the scene with Moonbreeda's parents in Endwalker. He said that was a really, really tough scene for him to go through because he kept wanting to make little tweaks to it, and every time they had to make little tweaks to that scene, he had to watch it again, and it was just like, well, now I get to cry again over and over and over. So he's like, let's talk about something else so I don't start crying right now. And the last one he named was Vanna's walk. That would be when Answers is playing in the background, and as they called it, mud. Pretty sure it's not mud, but as she's kind of walking through the time stream, and it's kind of summarizing her experience all the way to the current day. He said those are the 3 most major moments that he looked to for moments that moved him the most. Then he talked about, as we move over to the next one, this one took him quite a while to get through because those are some pretty big moments. We have, what is your favorite location or zone, or one that's left an impression on you over the last 10 years? And his answer was really simple here. It was the 3 city-states. And his favorite thing about them is kind of from his perspective as director and producer. What would happen is anytime a new patch would release, he would just kind of hide and AFK in one of the city-states, watch people log in and start talking about what kind of content they're going to go do, and kind of just people watching as a sense because of how just busy the areas are whenever there is a new patch or new content. Hilariously enough, on stream when we were watching this, we kept going, I really hope it wasn't Limsa Lominsa. And then Matt Bayonne over there, who is the one running the panel, community manager, he even says, he's like, I sure hope it wasn't Limsa Lominsa. And Yoshida, I don't think Yoshida picked up what he was putting down because he's like, well, Limsa Lominsa is really busy, so I kind of like to go to the other ones most of the time. And he's just like, yeah, that's probably for the better. I was like, thank you. Thank you for bringing that energy on stage, because I know that's what I was thinking and saying while I was watching this take place. So moving on to the next one, this is about decisions in the development. What was the most difficult decision to make regarding expansion development after A Realm Reborn's release? And the number one thing seemed to be surprising the players. He actually specifically talked about zones, like, oh, Heavensward, we're going to Ishgard, but now all of a sudden we have Azathoth on the floating continent. Oh, we're going to Alamigo for Stormblood, but wait, we're also going to the Far East with Kugane and Doma and all that. And then, then he just, he names basically those kind of surprises about how far we're going to go. Of course, with Endwalker going to the edge of the universe when we thought the moon was our final destination. So he said coming up with those surprises, things the players don't see coming, is the big thing that he finds to be the most difficult decision. On top of that, he's very worried about what they're doing for 7.0. He has to make sure that it has that same thing. So that's what he's thinking about right now, is like, for 7.0, how am I really going to surprise them? How far are we going to go? Like, what's the thing they're expecting, and how can I not do what they're expecting? And he said next, because he didn't want to talk about that or spoil that anymore. So moving on to the next one, we have, looking forward to the 10th anniversary, are there any events or developments that have been particularly memorable or surprising in the last 10 years? And the thing he went to was the first ever fan festival, the one in North America in Las Vegas. Now, there's two memories that he specifically named from that. The first was the registration system going down and the lines being 6 to 7 hours long for people to get registered for the event the day before. That was massive. There's a lot of people who got to know each other in that line. But his biggest surprise was when his PR manager went out there and said, you should just, go out there and, do whatever, say sorry, or just be in front of people. And he went out and he was met with applause. And that was a big surprise for him. He thought everyone was going to be super angry and blame him. And instead, just a round of applause, people wanting to take pictures, all that stuff. So he was very glad that it wasn't really dampening the mood at all. The other thing was the keynote. He was apparently so worried for the opening keynote to talk about Heavensward that it was supposed to be 90 minutes, but he got through it so fast, he spoke so fast, it only took 60. So it was a which I don't even remember. I think I was just thinking about like how I was going to plan out the rest of my day as they were winding down towards the end of the keynote. So I don't even remember that being there, and I was in the crowd. And so that was the other thing. And he remembers going on social media and everyone being like, why was it so short? And so he was really scared and nervous. But either way, I mean, it's still a good memory. It's still something that really stands out to him over the last 10 years. Speaking of 10 years, the next question we have here, which is several minutes later after all that, got a quick image of him being embarrassed there briefly. What would Naoki Yoshida from 10 years ago say to the current one? Now, they were originally going to reverse this question and answer. What would you tell yourself 10 years ago? Because realistically, I think that's the more the answer that they actually wanted. But instead, he just answered it as it was. He just said, it's like, I didn't even know if I was going to be alive in 10 years. I wouldn't be thinking about what to tell myself. So instead he answered it like, what 10 years from now would he tell himself when he's like close to his 60s? And it was honestly just kind of a checking up on himself thing. Like, are you still healthy? Do you still love all the same stuff like snowboarding? And of course, the expectation that Final Fantasy XIV would still be going strong even 10 years from now. So he'll worry about this question then, and maybe he'll get to answer them, when the time actually comes. Now, the next one is his favorite memory from gameplay over the past 10 years. And the thing he mentions is kind of not an individual moment. He just talks about how much he loves going on his private character that nobody knows is Yoshi P, and just kind of doing raids in the Party Finder because he doesn't have a static to do them with. So he'll go do like extreme trials and savages and stuff in the Party Finder on server, just incognito. And then he talks about like, if you've played with me, you might know because I'm the black mage who puts my ley lines way away from everyone and refuses to move out of them no matter what. And then he teases a couple more things, which just sounds like average black mage play. And then goes, maybe we should stop talking about this. I don't want people to figure out who my ult is. I was like, bro, you just generalized the like most common thing people say about black mage. I don't know what you were expecting. Like, yeah, they're going to figure it out from that. Oh, this black mage isn't moving out of his ley lines. Must be Yoshi P. Yeah, that's what people are thinking. Oh, yeah. Moving on to the next one. This one was actually one that I looked forward to, but Yoshida was a little afraid to answer, and for good reason. What are some elements from the Final Fantasy series that you haven't been able to include that you'd like to get to in the next 10 years? Please say Dalmasca. We need more of Matsuno's Ivalice arc, which he didn't address that thing in particular. Of course, he does mention Ivalice. He does say, obviously we do have Ivalice in there, so that's always a thing. But this is one of those things where he doesn't want to answer it, because if he does, people get attached to the idea that it's happening. So he, of course, takes an easy one and says Final Fantasy 16. Obviously, that's coming out soon. But then he also says Final Fantasy 2, they could pull a lot of stuff from. Final Fantasy 9 is another big one. He also says 7 Remake, once it's been finished, like all 3 of the remake games have been finished, he'd like to reference some more stuff from that particular series. And then he says, like I said, Ivalice is an option, but we also have Vana'diel. And then the room kind of goes quiet, and then he just looks at Matt and goes, next. And everyone I think he knows everyone's theorized for ages that Vana'diel is one of the shards, or that the new world has a lot of Vana'diel elements, given the Mammal Jaw are from there, and they are from the Ot Urgan expansion of Love. People have long theorized stuff about Vana'diel and Eorzea's involvement with each other. So I think he knows that even just by invoking the name Vana'diel, it's kind of a risk factor. So I'm not surprised that he wanted to move on from that one. The next one is just a question about if he's heard any more real life stories like the Dad of Light one since Dad of Light aired on Netflix. And he actually said before Dad of Light, he was already hearing those stories. And that's kind of like a big reason why Dad of Light existed in the first place. But also, since then, obviously he's heard more of those stories, but especially during the pandemic, when it was at its height and people couldn't really see each other and they wanted to have an experience together, he got tons of stories about either parents or family members, distant from each other, playing together as a means of having a shared experience during that time. And also now he sees stories, about couples who play Final Fantasy XIV. When they have a kid, they talk about how they've welcomed a new Warrior of Light into the world. So he gets a lot of heartwarming stories like that. But those have always been persistent even before Dad of Light. So it's not something particular to Dad of Light. And the next one is a bit of a meme. It's a worthwhile meme, but it's gonna happen. I'm convinced it's gonna happen. He was asked, will you do a 14 and 16 crossover? And he's done this bit before, so we already knew it was coming. But he, of course, says, well, I'm the director and producer of Final Fantasy XIV, but I can't just do whatever I want. So if anything's going to happen, I have to go talk to the producer of Final Fantasy XVI and see what he wants to do about this. So, maybe if we run into each other, maybe if we have the opportunity, we'll have a sit down and have a conversation. In case you didn't know, he is the producer of Final Fantasy XVI. That's the joke. That's the joke for any who somehow still don't know that and don't get it. So yeah, he just did a whole bit on that. He's done it before. And honestly, I expect him to do it at the 16 panel tomorrow if they don't actually announce that there is I would love it if they announce that they're going to do one at tomorrow's 16 panel, but he leaves during a trailer for it and comes back with a different shirt. And they're like, now we'd like to welcome in the Final Fantasy XIV director and producer, Naoki Yoshida. I mean, just, you can do it. Come on. Then they asked him what his favorite Final Fantasy was. So we actually know the answer to this, or at least we know one of the major answers to this, because he's obviously been asked this before. Final Fantasy 3 is a big favorite. Final Fantasy 3 is very popular in Japan. And we mean, of course, the actual 3, not NA3, in case anyone still questions that all these years later. So that's a big one. And he says actually a big reason is because the director of Final Fantasy XI, the original director, Tanaka-san, he was actually a producer on Final Fantasy 3, and he's always appreciated his work. So that's why there's a lot of references to Tanaka's work in Final Fantasy 14. He also says Final Fantasy 7, just because it kind of was the first Final Fantasy that really broadened the scope on Final Fantasy. Said the graphics, obviously, going into the PlayStation 1 era were a whole lot different, more advanced. And then on top of that, you have how big the world is, all the mini games, all the activities that you can do. It was far more expansive in terms of its story, its content. So he kind of said it felt like an MMO in a single player game, which I think is better achieved by 12, but I understand what he's saying about 7 in this particular case. But he said those are the two big favorites that he thinks he would single out when asked the question. Then we have another interesting one. If you were releasing 14 for the first time into the MMO market today in 2023, what would that game be like? So it's not what changes would you make. He's just thinking about like what they would consider, because obviously an MMO being built is being built by a company to sustain itself and to make a profit. So he says we'd have to analyze the gaming market nowadays, and he thinks about what the market is like. And he thinks the game itself probably wouldn't be that different. You know, he would probably have housing. He still wouldn't want any like PKing out in the field. But honestly, the only thing, he's like, we'd still be focused on the narrative. Like, we'd still be wanting to do most of the same stuff. So he actually doesn't think it would look that different as a game. But the big thing is that nowadays free to play is so much more popular that he thinks about what it would have been like if the game was built free to play. And if he released a free to play Final Fantasy 14 nowadays, and then he thinks about, he just starts making fun of like the microtransactions. He's like, yeah, but then I think about it as like, what if we had housing, right? And like, but all the furniture you had to buy off of the store, and there was no like, he starts thinking about like how free to play games are monetized, and he's like, yeah, I don't think most people would like that idea. He's just like, people would just question the game more, probably be a lot less interest in it, which seems like a major slight against modern MMOs. But hey, I you know what? I can't really argue with the man. He's kind of got a point, because we see that nowadays. So he actually thinks it wouldn't be that much different, but he fears that it would just be different from like a monetization standpoint versus what they've managed to do right now. Moving on to the next one. This is a bit of a feelsies one, if I recall. We have, since the release of Endwalker, we've had the dev team discuss more frequently. Oh, no, that's a different one that I'm thinking of. We've had the dev team discuss more frequently about the 10-year future of Final Fantasy XIV. What future project are you personally most excited about? This was always one we were going to get one very easy to predict answer about, is the graphics update, because it's the one thing we know for certain they are working hard on for the future of Final Fantasy XIV. He actually said that they just did like a midway review. They want to make sure they have some stuff to show at the next Fan Fest in regards to the graphics update. But, you know, they said they've been working really hard at that, and that's something he can't wait to show people more of. So that's going to be his answer. Yeah, he was never going to say anything other than that. Then we dive back into a more specific character-related one. When will we see more of Pippin? When will we see him more in action? We adventured with him a lot. Now he's filling in for Raubon's place. I want to see him grow as a character too. To which I said, he's a Lalafell. That's as tall as they get. But as a character, he actually just said that it's not even just Ul'dah. You know, I'm not even just Pippin. It's like all of Ul'dah's politics. Like Pippin's involved in the politics over there. He's helping the Sultana. So, you know, they don't want to promise that they're going to do something with Pippin, because if he mentions it, if he says, yeah, we'll do something, then people are just going to be, you know, hounding him for it. But he says, you know, when the Warrior of Light needs him, Pippin will be there. So always keep an eye out for him whenever you're in a really tight space. And that was about all we got out of that one. Yeah, he's not going to say, oh yeah, Pippin's coming back. Speaking of which, he doesn't want to say that because it's false promises, but we did get a little teaser about something that we kind of already knew. It has been 10 years since A Realm Reborn, and I still want to know more about the Heart of Sabik. Are there plans to delve more into it? Please say yes. So for those who don't remember, the Ultima weapon houses the Heart of Sabik, and it's what the primals are absorbed into, and then it's used in order to fuel the Ultima spell. Well, we know we're dealing with La Habrea stuff. We know we have Pandemonium coming up. Most people have suspected the Heart of Sabik is going to be key to the final tier of Pandemonium, and we seemingly get a teaser of just that here. He says he doesn't want to say that we're going to dive too deep into it, but at the very least it will be discussed in the near future in Final Fantasy XIV. Just it doesn't want to say how much, but it will be we'll be revisiting the idea of the Heart of Sabik soon, which is obviously referring to Pandemonium. Like, it has to be. There's no reason to suspect it would be anywhere else other than there, given the involvement with La Habrea. And then finally, what are his personal goals for the next 10 years? That is the last question. Let me just get it on screen. What is your personal aim for Final Fantasy XIV for the next 10 years, whether in gameplay, story, or as an MMO in general? So he wasn't really sure how much he could say here, because again, if he says something, then it makes it seem like it's happening. So he just thought, like, in theory, what would be best for the game? Opening up more physical data centers, supporting more languages, making sure the game is on even more platforms, like just expanding the scope of the game, how many people can access the game. That would be like a big thing that he would love to improve over the next 10 years. Big thing that he really wants to achieve is connecting all the data centers so everybody can play with everyone worldwide, regardless of location, without having to worry about what server you started on or data center you started on. And this is something he's commented on before. They said they would see how stable cross-world was now and then look to expanding it to be actually cross-world. They said they had figured out a way to do it, but they were concerned about the stability of it all. So we may be seeing something like that in the future. We know it's a goal, so this is just repeating something that he said before. And I think a lot of people would definitely appreciate that, especially people seeing what's been going on with the Materia data center, how it's kind of struggled to have a major foothold. A lot of the people I know who were playing on it or have played on it or play on it on occasion still keep characters and more frequently play on other data centers because those are the people they've been playing with for the past 10 years. So it's kind of tough to just up and leave and go to a data center that makes more sense in terms of latency and stuff when those aren't the people you have memories with. So I think that's a big way of trying to make it so that, okay, now I can play on that. And if I want to, I can visit my friends. I think that would be a big improvement. And then everything else is just about making incremental steps forward. You know, they've constantly been building on what they made from the start, and everything they do is kind of built on top of that. One big thing he wanted to tease is that something they've been working on improving for a while now, and what's been a big request, is actually the increase in the total number of furnishings you can have in your house. They said that's been a major hurdle, and they're hoping to have that improved sometime in 7.x, but it's a ways away, but they're going to keep working on it. And then the only other thing is 10 years from now, he'd like to come back to PAX East and do this exact same panel again. Now, at the end of it all, they did just tease all the Puma stuff. If you haven't seen the Puma collaboration with the new kicks, or as Matt called it, drip. He's like, what do the kids call it nowadays? Drip? I wanted to see if I could find like a still of him showing off his drip. Oh, you know what, though? Actually, this isn't going to have the whole thing. I just realized because I grabbed this like right as it was over. But yeah, and that's the other thing, a reminder that the Puma stuff is going to go on sale March 25th. That's tomorrow as of the recording of this video. So please keep an eye on socials and the stores and all that stuff for North America and Europe in case you're looking to get some of that stuff from the team. They are also sporting some of the Puma stuff on them at the moment, the jackets in particular. And there were pictures people could take with the characters dressed in their Puma outfits from the trailer that came out recently. So that covers the Q&A panel for Final Fantasy XIV. A few interesting tidbits, a few interesting insights, but no major news. Like I said, that's being saved for the live letter next week. We'll also have another live letter probably in May. And then, of course, we'll have the Fan Fest, which will have both an opening keynote and a live letter, most likely, in late July. So keep an eye on the channel for news from all those sources. However, one more reminder. We have a Final Fantasy XVI panel tomorrow, and that is not a simple Q&A as far as we know. They are going to be talking about things that are brand new. I will be covering that on the channel. And who knows, maybe the Final Fantasy XVI producer will have some comment about the discussions he's had with the Final Fantasy XIV producer about a collaboration. It just might happen. Who knows? Either way, that's going to be a wrap for the Final Fantasy XIV PAX East Q&A overview. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share, and stay tuned on everything 14 and soon to be 16 related news. With that, I'll see you all in the next one. And until then, take care.